This is section 1.4, bias in studies. Let's take a look at some real-world bias with real-world implications. In 2025, Zohran Mamdani won the New York City Democratic primary over the heavily favored Andrew Cuomo by 7 points, which is quite a lot, even though it seems that Cuomo was leading in the polls by double digits up until the actual vote. These are the pre-primary polls as aggregated by the New York Times. So how did this happen? Well, what seems to have happened was pollsters undersampled likely Mamdani voters and oversampled likely Cuomo voters. Probably, given the high turnout, they also probably oversampled people who did not vote. And so whatever they did, they seem to have changed a couple of things because post the primary, Mamdani seems to be comfortably in the lead. And yes, he is running against Cuomo again, although also against a couple of other people. Also, these polls were compiled by the New York Times. So, just goes to show you that even at the highest levels, with very high stakes, the top people can get things wrong because of bias, unintentional bias. So, first of all, what is bias? Well, first off, a study conducted by procedures that will get the correct results on average is unbiased. Of course, any one poll could be off, but maybe that's just because there was an unlucky, unrepresentative sample that was drawn. But the idea is that if you continue to use this unbiased methodology and conduct lots of polls, eventually you will arrive at the correct average. On the other hand, a study conducted with poor methodology that maybe oversamples or undersamples population is biased, and maybe we want to avoid that because we don't want to get things wrong, right? Avoiding bias can be difficult or even impossible, often because researchers don't realize they're using biased methodology, right? And that can be for very innocent reasons. Maybe there was a demographic that was really important that they didn't think to control for. Maybe they really just didn't get good access to a representative swath of voters. There are all sorts of reasons this can happen. So we maximize what we can control, which in this case means understanding the different types of bias and how to avoid them. So pause the video, read example 2. Is there any bias going on here? Well, let's see. This guy attacks Mamdani. This question right here attacks the current mayor, Adams. And then this guy praises Cuomo, right? So after these 3 questions that clearly prime you in favor of Cuomo and against the other guys, they ask who you want to vote for. So this is bias. So we say bias occurs in the priming of the first 3 questions, which I guess you could say, which lean toward Cuomo and against his opponents. Okay? So this is called priming. Right? Now let's look at a cousin of priming called the leading question, right? Suppose I said something maybe not related to New York City, but still related to U.S. Issues, right? Do you support or oppose increasing our border security, knowing that criminals likely pass through our borders? Here, we would say the question is leading because it suggests the so-called correct answer. Which is to prevent criminals from entering. Right? Why would anyone ever want criminals to enter the U.S.? So, right, you would say, well, I don't want criminals to enter the U.S., so I guess I support increasing our border security, right? But maybe if they just said, do you support or oppose increasing our border security, and you didn't add the whole thing about criminals, maybe the answer would have been different, right? That's an example of a leading question. Other types of bias include non-response bias. We'll get to that in the next page. Non-response bias, which is when most respondents, or maybe many respondents, or I should say not respondents, actually. I should say most people don't respond. Skewing the results, right? Or just dampening them. Maybe you just don't even get enough results. So that's important. There's also self-interest bias. And that's an example where perhaps a pollster or a company asks something or conducts an experiment in a way that benefits itself. So conducting a study whose results are meant to favor themselves. And then another thing that can happen is social acceptability bias. Right? And that's where a person either doesn't say anything or says something that they don't really feel just to be socially acceptable. So I'll say respondent doesn't answer truthfully out of fear of some kind of negative consequences, we'll say. All right, so these are all different kinds of bias that you have to watch out for. Now, let's just spend a minute on non-responders. Non-responders are people who, well, don't respond in a study, I guess. Non-response is what we call it. Right, and that should be a lowercase I. Right. Explain why bias could occur in a survey with non-response, especially intentional non-response. So I'll just say non-response could, number one, it could omit a popular view, right? If a bunch of people with the same view all decide that they don't want to respond, then that view doesn't get represented. But another thing that can happen is it can just weaken the study with insufficient data. If so many people don't respond, then there's just no way to know what anyone thinks. So this is the problem with non-response. So try to think of a poll that's biased by non-response. Okay. Now, one last type of bias that we have to worry about, and this is what the pollsters have to worry about, is something called sampling bias. This occurs when the sample of a survey is biased in some way. Now, this is really difficult to avoid because sometimes you just don't know the population that you're sampling from. You don't know what the demographics you're looking for are. You're just really doing your best in this case. So researchers spend a lot of time ensuring that their samples aren't biased, but even then, as we saw in New York City, they're not perfect, right? Things can happen. So once again, try coming up with an experiment that has a sampling bias.